A crown can dazzle in the light, but sometimes its shine blinds more than it inspires, and no royal crown carried as much controversy as the one worn by Camilla when she became Queen Consort. Before we dive into this extraordinary story of power, scandal, and betrayal, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Subscribing ensures you'll never miss our deep dives into the untold dramas that shape the royal family's legacy. And trust me, you'll want to stay tuned, because Camilla's journey is not just about a woman who married a king. It's about how shadows from the past never truly disappear, how whispers can be louder than cheers, and how the crown itself demands a price greater than love. The story begins with a coronation that should have been triumphant. In 2023, after decades of speculation, Charles finally ascended to the throne. At his side stood Camilla, officially crowned Queen Consort, a title she had spent much of her life waiting for, and yet one she wore under a cloud of suspicion. To the world, her image had always been complicated. She was not a blank slate like Catherine, who had risen gracefully in the public's eyes, nor was she a beloved figure like Diana, whose memory refused to fade even decades after her passing. Camilla's story was one of reinvention, of trying to transform a reputation built on scandal into one of dignity. But the problem was simple. For millions of people across the country and beyond, she would forever remain the other woman. Every crown tells a story, and Camilla's crown was heavy with history. For years, newspapers had turned her into a caricature, mocking her appearance, dissecting her voice, and painting her as the destroyer of a fairy tale marriage. Even when she and Charles married in 2005, it wasn't with the full fairy tale pomp of a future king and queen. It was subdued, understated, deliberately quiet, as if the monarchy itself understood the fragility of public opinion. Time passed, scandals dulled, and the palace carefully rehabilitated her image. Slowly, she was presented as a grandmotherly figure, a supportive partner to Charles, a steadying hand behind the scenes. But even with those efforts, the public's approval never truly bloomed. Poll after poll showed her numbers hovering dangerously low, sometimes at 30%, sometimes even less. By contrast, Catherine's approval soared, regularly reaching 70 or 80%. It was a gap so wide that it couldn't be ignored. One was viewed as the crown's golden future, the other as its reluctant compromise. That fragile support became the foundation of what was to come. Because popularity, in the world of monarchy, isn't just about smiles and appearances. It's the lifeblood of legitimacy. Without it, every move becomes a risk, every misstep becomes a scandal, and every whisper becomes a headline. For Camilla, those whispers grew louder the moment she settled into her new role. At first, the narrative was carefully controlled. She was a dutiful wife, supporting her husband as he took on the responsibilities of king. But behind palace walls, insiders began noticing small, subtle changes. Camilla wasn't content to simply smile at ceremonies and cut ribbons. She wanted to understand more. She asked for policy briefings. She arranged private gatherings. She drew staff into her orbit. These actions, while perhaps innocent in intent, fed into a narrative that had always followed her, that she was reaching for influence beyond what the crown had offered. And then came Raymil House, the private estate in Wiltshire that Camilla had purchased long before she became queen. For years, it was described as her sanctuary, a retreat where she could escape the pressures of royal life. But once she wore the crown, that sanctuary took on a different symbolism. Rumours swirled that secret meetings were held there, that it was a place where conversations happened away from palace walls, that influence was being exercised in the shadows. Whether these claims were true or wildly exaggerated hardly mattered. The perception alone was enough to fuel suspicion. Raymil House, once just a country home, became in the public's imagination a fortress of secrets. What makes this story so compelling is not just the facts of what happened, but how perception shaped destiny. In the monarchy, truth and rumour often blur into one. A smile can be read as a scheme, a retreat can be branded a plot, and silence can be interpreted as guilt. For Camilla, every move she made was seen through the lens of decades-old scandal. She was never granted the benefit of the doubt. If she smiled too brightly, it was scheming. If she stepped back, it was sulking. If she asked questions, it was meddling. And this double standard, this eternal comparison to both Diana and Catherine, created a storm that no crown could weather. But even as the storm clouds gathered, Camilla pressed forward. She appeared at ceremonies, attended engagements, shook hands, and smiled for cameras. To many, she seemed determined to prove she belonged. Yet the harder she tried, the more visible the cracks became. Polls showed the public's skepticism never softened. Social media amplified every criticism, resurrecting old scandals and dragging them into the present. And inside the family, resistance began to brew. Princess Anne, always blunt, reportedly warned Charles that Camilla was harming the crown. William, whose loyalty to his mother's memory ran deep, grew colder, angered by suggestions that Camilla wanted greater roles for her own children. The private family dynamic was turning into a battlefield, and so the question hung over the palace like a sword. Could Camilla's crown survive the weight of controversy? Could decades of scandal ever be washed away by a few years of service? Or was this reign destined to collapse under the strain of distrust, resentment, and broken loyalties? These were not just questions whispered by commentators, they were questions that echoed through the very walls of Buckingham and Windsor, growing louder with every passing month. That's where the story we're about to tell takes its most dramatic turn, because eventually, whispers became accusations, doubts became confrontations, and in a private palace meeting, Camilla's world collapsed in silence. Charles, torn between his love for her and his duty to the crown, made a choice that stunned the royal family and shocked the nation. A crown once placed upon her head was suddenly stripped away, not with a public ceremony, not with fanfare, but with the quiet authority of a king who realised that love could no longer outweigh legacy. This is the story of Camilla's crown under controversy. It is the story of a rise defined by doubt and a fall defined by betrayal. And as we unravel this tale, we will see how the monarchy's most fragile figure became its most controversial, and how her final walk away from Clarence House left questions that may never be answered. Make sure you're subscribed, because the next part of this story dives deep into the palace whispers, the family confrontations, and the shocking moment where silence spoke louder than any crown. You won't want to miss it.
Mill House. Just the name alone began to stir whispers across the kingdom, transforming what was once Camilla's quiet countryside escape into a symbol of secrecy and unease. Before her crown, Mill had been her sanctuary, purchased in the mid-1990s as a private refuge, far from the scrutiny of cameras and the rigid expectations of royal life. It was where she could breathe, laugh freely with close friends, and escape into a life unbound by the rules of Buckingham Palace. But once she became Queen Consort, that private retreat took on a darker meaning. People no longer saw it as a harmless hideaway. Instead, it became a backdrop for suspicion, a place where shadows seemed to gather, and the line between personal retreat and political intrigue blurred. If you're enjoying this exploration of Camilla's crown under controversy, don't forget to subscribe. This channel is where we bring you the stories the palace wishes you would forget. To understand why Mill House became so controversial, we need to revisit the atmosphere that surrounded Camilla in those first months of her queenship. She had already entered the role with a reputation battered by decades of scandal. To her critics, she represented compromise, not celebration. Her approval numbers, hovering near 30%, were a constant reminder that she lacked the public trust necessary to solidify her reign. Meanwhile, Catherine's numbers soared, reaching into the 70s and 80s. The contrast could not have been more stark. While Catherine was embraced as the perfect balance of modern grace and tradition, Camilla was tolerated at best and resented at worst. Against this backdrop, Mill House came under the spotlight. People wanted to know, what exactly was happening behind those closed doors? Whispers spread of dinners held away from the palace, of meetings attended only by those Camilla trusted most. For some, these were harmless gatherings, just a queen retreating into the comfort of her own home. But for others, the idea was deeply unsettling. The monarchy is built on transparency, or at least the appearance of it. Every event is choreographed, every appearance documented, every word carefully measured. Mill, by contrast, was invisible. No cameras, no staff oversight, no accountability. The public began to imagine the worst. Was this the place where influence was traded, where promises were whispered in confidence, where the Queen Consort built a court of her own? The irony was that secrecy breeds suspicion even when no secrets exist. Once the public imagines shadows, the shadows begin to feel real. And with Camilla's fragile standing, every rumor stuck. Mill House became a narrative weapon, wielded by critics to portray her as overreaching, as someone who had stepped beyond the ceremonial role of consort into something far more dangerous, the appearance of power. Even her defenders struggled to protect her. How could they explain why the Queen Consort needed her own separate estate, apart from the king? How could they defend the fact that she often retreated there instead of staying within the palace walls? This growing unease fed into a larger story, the sense that Camilla was never truly of the crown. While Catherine was praised for seamlessly stepping into her royal role, Camilla always seemed to keep one foot outside. Mill symbolized that distance. It was not Windsor, not Sandringham, not Balmoral. Those estates belonged to the crown, steeped in centuries of history. Mill was personal, private, hers. And in the eyes of many, it became proof that she was unwilling or unable to fully surrender to the role she had taken on. But Raymill House was not the only factor fueling the controversy. Inside the palace itself, whispers began to spread. Staff noticed Camilla asking for documents, requesting briefings, and arranging intimate dinners with select insiders. On the surface, none of this was unusual. Any consort would want to be informed, to understand the currents flowing around the monarchy. Yet within the context of her history, these actions were seen in a different light. To some, it appeared that Camilla was testing loyalties, drawing people into her circle, slowly carving out influence where none was supposed to exist. And when perception is already poisoned, even innocent gestures can feel like betrayals. The tension only deepened as her approval numbers remained stubbornly low. Polls showed her struggling to win the hearts of the public, and each new headline about her actions, whether real or imagined, seemed to confirm what critics already believed. This lack of trust extended into the family itself. Princess Anne, the most blunt and uncompromising of Charles's siblings, began to warn that Camilla's presence was doing lasting harm to the monarchy. William, who had long harbored quiet resentment over his stepmother's role in his mother's heartbreak, grew increasingly cold. The tipping point, it is said, came when Camilla pushed for her children to have greater recognition within the royal orbit. For William, this was unacceptable. To him, the monarchy was not a stage to elevate outsiders, it was a sacred duty, passed down through blood, safeguarded for the next generation. Camilla's ambitions, even if modest, were seen as a threat. And so the palace became a battlefield, though one fought with silence rather than swords. Every family gathering carried undercurrents of tension. Every briefing was laced with suspicion. Every decision Charles made seemed to teeter between his loyalty to Camilla and his duty to the crown. He loved her, unquestionably, but he also knew the monarchy was fragile. At a time when its survival depended on unity and popularity, Camilla's presence had become a liability. The question was no longer whether the whispers about Raymill were true, it was whether the whispers themselves were enough to destroy her reign. The tragedy of this chapter lies in how perception became reality. Whether Camilla truly overreached or simply wanted to be informed hardly mattered. The image of her retreating to Raymill, of her gathering allies in quiet rooms, of her trying to carve out space for her own family, it all painted a picture of a queen consort unwilling to stay in the shadows. For the monarchy, built on the delicate balance of tradition, that picture was intolerable. The crown may be worn in gold, but it is carried in trust. And once that trust is broken, even by rumor, the weight becomes unbearable. Raymill House, then, was never just a house. It was a symbol, a reminder of how far Camilla stood from the heart of the monarchy, and how close she stood to losing it all. And as tensions built inside the palace, the whispers of Raymill began to merge with the voices of resistance from within the family itself. The stage was set for confrontation, and for a decision that would shake the monarchy at its core. This is where the story sharpens into conflict. A queen consort who sought refuge but found only suspicion. A royal family divided between loyalty and resentment. And a crown that was becoming too heavy to hold. The palace is built on ritual, silence, and carefully scripted appearances, but behind its heavy doors, the atmosphere had shifted into something tense, brittle, and combustible. For months, the whispers surrounding Camilla had grown louder. Her approval ratings remained alarmingly low, her presence was increasingly described as a liability, and even within the family, patience was thinning. The pressure built slowly, like storm clouds gathering over Windsor. And then, one evening, the inevitable confrontation finally came. Before we dive in, make sure you hit subscribe, because this is where Camilla's crown under controversy reaches its breaking point, and you won't want to miss the details of what unfolded behind those gilded walls. It began not with shouting, but with silence. A private meeting had been called, framed as a quiet evening for reflection. Only a select few were invited, those closest to the crown, those whose voices carried the most weight. Charles sat at the head of the room, visibly weary from months of balancing public duties with private turmoil. At his side, Camilla appeared composed, though her stillness betrayed the nerves beneath. Princess Anne was there, sharp-eyed and unflinching as always. William, cold and restrained, sat opposite, his presence heavy with unspoken resentment. This was no ordinary gathering, it was an intervention, and everyone knew it. and was the first to speak. She had never been one to dance around truth, and her words cut with precision. She told Charles that the crown was faltering under Camilla's shadow, that whispers of overreach and secret dealings had eroded the public's trust. She reminded him that the monarchy was not a game of personal loyalty. It was an institution built on service and perception, and right now, both were slipping away. Her warning carried no malice, only urgency. The longer Camilla remained in her position, the deeper the cracks in the foundation would spread. William followed, his voice colder, sharper. For him, this was not just about polls or approval ratings. It was personal. He spoke of his mother, of Diana's legacy, of how Camilla's presence had always felt like a shadow cast across his life. But beyond the personal, he raised the issue of her ambitions, her attempts to nudge her own children closer to royal recognition. For William, this was not only unacceptable but dangerous. The monarchy, he argued, was already fragile, already walking a fine line in the modern world. To expand its inner circle with outsiders, even by subtle means, was a betrayal of duty. His words hung in the air, heavy with both anger and sorrow. Camilla listened in silence, but her stillness could not conceal the weight of the accusations. To be told, to her face, that she was a danger to the crown, that her presence was poisoning the very institution she had worked so hard to support, was a humiliation few could endure. She tried to defend herself, insisting that her actions were misunderstood, that she had only ever acted out of loyalty to Charles and the monarchy. She reminded them of her decades beside him, of the years she had endured ridicule, of the transformation she had attempted to make. But her words found no fertile ground. To Anne, they sounded like excuses. To William, they sounded like schemes. And to Charles, they sounded like a plea he could no longer fully believe. The confrontation stretched into a long, tense exchange, every sentence pulling tighter the rope that bound them. Charles sat quietly for much of it, his gaze distant, as though staring into a future he desperately wished to avoid. He loved Camilla, of that there was no doubt. She had been his partner through decades of scandal, his confidant, his anchor. But now, as king, he was bound by a duty greater than personal loyalty. The monarchy demanded sacrifice, and in this moment, it was demanding hers. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. It was Charles who finally broke it. His voice, when it came, was low but steady. He acknowledged the loyalty Camilla had shown him, the love they had shared, the years of companionship. But then, in words that seemed to drain the very air from the room, he declared that the monarchy could not withstand the strain any longer. The title of Queen Consort, he said, must be set aside. Not because he wished it, but because the crown itself demanded it. Camilla's face betrayed no immediate emotion. Perhaps she had prepared herself for this possibility. Perhaps she had believed Charles would never dare. But the reality struck like a blade. Her crown, the symbol of her decades-long journey from scandal to throne, was being stripped away not in public spectacle, but in the quiet verdict of a single room. Anne's eyes softened with a mixture of relief and regret. William remained impassive, though the tension in his jaw betrayed the storm beneath. Charles, for his part, seemed to age years in a matter of seconds, and was the one who sealed it with words that would be remembered long after. "It's time," she said, her voice calm, final. Those two words carried the weight of inevitability. The decision was not just made, it was acknowledged as the only path forward. For Camilla, the humiliation was profound. She had endured decades of criticism, rebuilt her life beside Charles, fought her way to legitimacy, and now, at the very peak of her triumph, it was all undone. To the public, she was still Queen Consort in name, but inside those palace walls, her crown had already been removed. What remained was only the question of when the world would know, and how they would respond. The meeting ended as it began, with silence. No shouting, no slammed doors, no dramatic exits. Just the quiet understanding that history had shifted. The monarchy had chosen survival over sentiment, public trust over private loyalty. Charles had chosen duty over love. And Camilla, stripped of the title she had waited a lifetime for, was left to walk out of that room carrying a burden heavier than any crown. The fallout would be swift, and the nation would soon divide into camps, some mourning her as a loyal partner betrayed, others celebrating Diana's posthumous victory. But inside the palace, in that private confrontation, the verdict had already been delivered. Camilla's crown, always under controversy, was now gone. This was the breaking point, the night when Anne's bluntness, William's cold resolve, and Charles's reluctant duty converged to rewrite the monarchy's story. But as the news seeped beyond palace walls, the true storm was only just beginning. Because the monarchy doesn't exist in silence, it exists in the eyes of the world. And when the world learned what had happened, the response was unlike anything the crown had seen in decades. The crown may be decided in palace rooms, but its fate is always sealed in the court of public opinion. When news of Camilla's demotion finally leaked, the monarchy entered one of its most volatile chapters in living memory. It didn't matter that the confrontation had been private or that the details were meant to remain hidden. Truth within the palace has a way of escaping, carried on whispers, amplified by insiders, and fueled by a public hungry for scandal. And when the revelation reached the outside world, the reaction was immediate, fierce, and divided. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe. This channel is where we unravel the stories the palace never once told, and the next chapters of Camilla's crown under controversy are nothing short of explosive. The first shock came in the form of carefully worded leaks to the press. Anonymous insiders spoke of a private family meeting, of raised voices and firm ultimatums, of Charles torn between his devotion to his wife and his duty to the throne. Though the palace refused to comment, the silence itself was confirmation enough. Newspapers splashed the story across front pages, talk shows dissected every detail, and the words "Queen Consort stripped" began trending online within hours. In a matter of days, Camilla's downfall transformed from whispered rumor into undeniable reality. Public opinion split in two, like a nation holding its breath and gasping at the same time. For one camp, this was justice long delayed. These were the voices who had never forgiven Camilla, who still carried the memory of Diana as the true Queen of Hearts. To them, this was Diana's posthumous victory, the crown reclaiming what had been lost, the final vindication of a woman who had been wronged. Hashtags celebrating Diana surged to the top of social media platforms. Old clips of her interviews resurfaced, reminding viewers of her charm, her pain, her humanity. Justice for Diana became not just a slogan but a rallying cry, echoing across timelines and television panels alike. But for another camp, the decision was nothing short of betrayal. These were the voices who had watched Camilla endure decades of ridicule, who saw her as a woman who had quietly shouldered abuse, mockery, and scorn, yet still stood loyally by Charles's side. To them, stripping her of her title was cruel, even cowardly. They argued that she had done her duty without complaint, that she had served her husband and the crown faithfully, and that she was being sacrificed on the altar of public opinion. Words like "loyalist betrayed" and "heartbreak at Clarence House" trended alongside the celebratory hashtags. The nation wasn't united in condemnation, it was fractured in debate. Social media, always the arena where drama explodes, became a battlefield. Threads dissected every rumor, memes juxtaposed Diana's radiant smiles with Camilla's weary expressions, and heated arguments erupted between those who believed the monarchy had righted a wrong and those who believed it had created a new one. Every photo of Camilla was scrutinized, every detail of her life at Raymil House pulled apart, every past headline re-examined in the harsh light of hindsight. For weeks, the digital landscape became a referendum not just on Camilla, but on the monarchy itself. Meanwhile, Catherine and William's star rose higher than ever. In the wake of the scandal, Catherine's public appearances were carefully staged, but the effect was profound. She greeted crowds with warmth, comforted children, and projected compassion at every opportunity. Polls showed her approval numbers climbing to record highs, as the public cast her as the perfect contrast to Camilla's embattled image. She was the Queen Consort the people wanted, the embodiment of grace and modernity, unburdened by scandal and embraced by nearly all corners of society. William, too, benefited from the shift. His cool resolve during the confrontation painted him as a protector of the crown, a son who defended his mother's legacy and ensured the monarchy's survival. Inside the palace, the fallout was equally intense. Staff who had once quietly aligned with Camilla suddenly distanced themselves, unwilling to be caught in the storm, and maintained her firm stance, reminding everyone that the crown must survive above all else. Charles, however, bore the heaviest weight. To the outside world, he remained stoic, attending engagements and smiling for cameras. But behind closed doors, those who saw him up close described a man hollowed by his decision. He had chosen the monarchy over the woman who had been his anchor for decades. He had sacrificed personal happiness for public trust. And though he never admitted regret, the toll was etched on his face for those who looked closely enough. For Camilla, the isolation was devastating. Stripped of her title in practice, if not yet in official announcement, she retreated from public appearances. When she did emerge, her attire was muted, her expressions somber, her demeanor subdued. Cameras captured her leaving Clarence's house one morning, her figure framed by the heavy gates, and the image went viral. Some captioned it as the Walk of Justice. Others called it the Walk of Heartbreak. But everyone agreed, it was the image of a woman whose crown had slipped beyond repair. What makes this chapter of the story so extraordinary is how it revealed the monarchy's fragile contract with its people. The crown does not rest on blood alone, it rests on trust. And trust is fickle, vulnerable to memory, to rumor, to perception. Camilla's decades of service, however sincere, could not erase the ghosts of the past or the comparisons of the present. In the end, perception became stronger than reality, and whispers grew louder than vows. The nation's division over Camilla's fall also mirrored a deeper divide in how people see the monarchy itself. To some, the crown is sacred, unchanging, bound to tradition and duty above all else. To others, it is an outdated institution, clinging to relevance in a modern world. Camilla's downfall became a symbol, a litmus test for where people stood. Was she the villain finally unmasked, or the loyal partner unjustly discarded? The answer depended less on truth and more on perspective. As the storm raged, one truth became undeniable. The monarchy had survived another scandal, but at great cost. The crown had been preserved, but a Queen Consort had been sacrificed. Catherine and William's rise gave the institution a hopeful future, but the present was marked by bitterness, division, and loss. Camilla, once the Queen at Charles's side, was now a figure cast into the shadows, uncertain whether to retreat into private life or to quietly plot some form of redemption. A crown under controversy. Those 4 words had defined Camilla's reign from the very beginning, but never more so than in its closing act. The final moments of her journey inside the House of Windsor were not marked by ceremony or applause, but by silence, an emptiness that echoed louder than any crowd could have. When news first broke that Charles had stripped Camilla of her title, it sent a shockwave across the nation, igniting debates in households, on television, and across every corner of social media. Some called it justice long overdue. Others mourned what they saw as a cruel betrayal of loyalty. But no matter which side you fell on, one truth was undeniable: history had shifted. The monarchy had taken a path that no one believed possible even a year before. And in the middle of it all stood Camilla, no longer Queen Consort, no longer the center of royal ceremony, but a woman walking away from power with the eyes of the world upon her. Before we look at what her departure truly meant, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to keep uncovering the untold stories that shape history, both inside the palace and beyond. The sight of Camilla's final walk became an image burned into memory. Cameras captured her leaving Clarence's house in muted attire. No regal gowns, no glittering jewelry, not even the air of defiance some expected. Instead, she appeared withdrawn, almost shrunken by the weight of what had transpired. For many viewers, it was the closest thing to closure in a saga that had spanned decades. A woman who had once been vilified as the other woman, then carefully rehabilitated into the public eye, was now reduced again to a symbol of controversy, stripped of the very title that was supposed to cement her legacy. But the story didn't end at that doorframe. It was only the beginning of the questions that would haunt the monarchy. Would Camilla retreat into private life, or would she linger in the shadows, waiting for a moment of revenge? The public's response was nothing short of explosive. Hashtags trended worldwide within minutes of the announcement. Some celebrated what they called Diana's posthumous victory, framing the decision as the ultimate justice for the late Princess of Wales. They flooded social media with images of Diana's smile, declaring that the crown had finally corrected its course. Others, however, viewed Camilla as the victim of a cold palace coup, abandoned by the man who had sworn to protect her, cast aside for the sake of optics and approval ratings. To them, she was no schemer, but a loyal partner whose decades of service and devotion to Charles ended in betrayal. These dueling narratives clashed online, in newspapers, even in coffee shops and offices across the nation. Camilla's downfall had become more than just a royal story. It was a mirror reflecting society's own divisions about loyalty, forgiveness, and the weight of history. Meanwhile, within palace walls, Catherine and William rose higher than ever before. Their approval ratings soared to record-breaking levels, with Catherine in particular being hailed as the steady hand guiding the monarchy into the future. Her compassionate public appearances, smiling at charity events, comforting grieving families, and showing a quiet but powerful strength, created a striking contrast with the image of Camilla's isolation. William's stoic resolve, combined with Catherine's warmth, formed a vision of a modern monarchy that many found reassuring. And though no official statement was ever made directly comparing Catherine to Camilla, the subtext was clear. In the public eye, there was a new face of the crown, and it was not the woman who had once held the title of Queen Consort. Yet, behind the glamour of Catherine and William's rise, the deeper question remained: what would become of Camilla herself? Stripped of her title, she still retained her private wealth and properties, including Mill House, the estate that had long been the subject of whispers and suspicions. Some speculated that she would retreat there permanently, away from the scrutiny of cameras and headlines, choosing a quiet life in the countryside. Others weren't so sure. Camilla had always been underestimated, they said, always dismissed until she proved otherwise. To them, it wasn't unthinkable that she might attempt to reassert influence from behind the scenes, using her network of allies and her knowledge of palace workings to remain a shadow player in royal affairs. The uncertainty added a layer of tension, as if the story wasn't truly finished, just paused. Charles himself emerged from the confrontation a fractured figure. While some applauded his choice as an act of duty over love, others saw it as weakness, a capitulation to pressure, a betrayal of the woman who had stood by him for over half a century. His silence in the aftermath spoke volumes. He made no public appearances for weeks, leaving Catherine and William to shoulder the spotlight. This absence only fueled speculation that the king was deeply shaken, wrestling with the fallout of his decision. Had he acted to save the monarchy, or had he bowed to the relentless tide of public opinion? No matter the answer, his reign would forever be remembered as the one where a crown was placed on Camilla's head, only to be taken away in silence. For Camilla, the road ahead seemed uncertain and fraught with difficulty. Without the shield of her title, every move she made would be interpreted through the lens of scandal. A private lunch with friends could be spun into a secret plot. A quiet holiday might be painted as an escape from disgrace. The media, once her fiercest enemy and later her reluctant ally, would never truly leave her alone. And as the monarchy itself leaned further into Catherine and William's leadership, Camilla risked being remembered as nothing more than a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fragile acceptance can be when built on shaky foundations. But here lies the greatest irony. For all the controversy, for all the whispers and accusations, Camilla's name is now etched permanently into royal history. She was the woman who divided a nation, the queen who never fully wore her crown, and the consort whose reign ended not with a ceremony, but with silence. Love, loyalty, betrayal, duty, all collided in her story, leaving behind a legacy as complicated as the woman herself. And though she walked away quietly, her shadow lingers. Because for every supporter who insists she was wronged, and for every critic who claims justice was served, one fact remains undeniable. A crown under controversy will always be remembered, long after Camilla's final walk has faded from the cameras. So what do you think? Was this the rightful end of a controversial reign, or a tragic betrayal of loyalty? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the untold stories that shape royal history. This chapter may be over, but the questions it leaves behind ensure the story is far from finished.